Welcome to Without the Beatles. I'm Mark Hooper.
I'm Des Birkinshaw. Today's episode, we have a fantastic interview with Godley Creme, one of the former founding members of 10cc. The other three are also going to feature at some point. We've recorded them all already. It's very unusual because they don't all do stuff, so reuniting them in name anyway will be quite interesting. One of the great video directors of all time, as well as a solo artist with Kevin Godley and a member of 10cc. So it's going to be interesting.
And of course, directed both Paul and George various videos, so knows them very well.
Yeah, he directed. What's the one? When We Were Fab.
Want
to direct.
Yeah, amazing.
And in fact,
lots of Easter eggs in there.
Lots of Easter eggs. Also, the thing about Lowell and Kev is that they worked a lot. So Kev actually directed the Real Love video when Three Alls got back together. Yeah. So between them, they've covered a lot of bases, you know. So we'll see how it goes. As usual, we're going to get straight in. Godley Creme, part one. Good morning. Hi, Lowell. It's so great to see you. First things first, I have to ask everyone is, could you imagine a world without the Beatles? And if not, why not?
Well, no, I can't imagine a world without the Beatles. I don't want to, anyway. Why would I want to do that? Because if there'd been no Beatles, I mean, I'm sure most of your musician people you interviewed that are in the music business, I'm sure most of them will have said that they wouldn't be in the business anyway. I certainly wouldn't have been in the business, I don't think. Not as a songwriter, anyway. Because it was because of the Beatles that I got the idea to start writing as opposed to playing the popular hits of the day, which we were doing when we were 13 and 14. And we were playing, you know, Connie Francis hits and Joe Brown's and those sort of things. And then the Beatles arrived, and I was still at school, and they'd written the songs themselves. And that was it. I left the group to become a songwriter. And in fact, I got my first song recorded and placed with the semi-professional band that Graham Goulman, that was later in 10cc, he was in a band called the Mockingbirds, and Kevin was playing drums. And they got a chance to make a record, and they did a Buddy Holly song as the A-side, and then didn't have a B-side. And I don't think Graham had started writing yet, and I'd written a song, and it was recorded, and it was called "Baby Not Like You," and that was because of the Beatles. You know, if you know, if local guys, you know, can write, that's what started me writing. And so, without that, it would have been different, wouldn't it, for me? I'm sure.
Yeah, and everyone does say that now. It's the myth of the Beatles, right? But what was it like at the time to be part of that revolution? Can you remember what that felt like? Did the world change for you? These are just ordinary guys in Liverpool, right?
Only the fact that, because it is so long ago now, I'm sorry. Only the fact that it really was radical to the ears. The nature of their songs were different. They were completely fresh. The harmony, the lyrical nature, it was just fresh. It was so different, the way John and Paul made songs. And of course, their Beatles as musicians and vocalists and arrangers were brilliant. They were brilliant. I mean, it was a huge influence on people interested in making music, musicians. We were all struggling to learn these chords. I couldn't figure them out because I don't know many chords. And some of the chords that they do know, and they knew then, I tried to find them. Because I was in a band that was, Bernard Manning had I'll digress. I'm sorry, you'll have to bear with me, I'll digress. Bernard Manning had a club. He had 3 clubs in Manchester. And I was in a band that was the resident band. And apart from backing his guest artists, we had to do the hits of the day. And I remember when She Loves You came out, that we were told to learn that one because that was a new. What's that? I put the record on again. What the hell? I don't know. I couldn't figure out a lot of their stuff. I've never been able to figure out other people's stuff, but I can figure out my own stuff, which is But they made me want to do that. They made me want to sort of push a bit and write and experiment with chords and top lines. And then when I eventually started working with Kev, I think Simon and Garfunkel and the Beatles were the big influence on us as songwriters, just because of the way they used lyric, new ways of doing top lines, and the way they put chords together, which were mainly guitar things.
Well, of course, there's an interesting story attached to that. I presume you know it. You know that the Simon and Garfunkel had failed. Really, they split up. Paul Simon's in England. Their producer Terry Melcher heard the Byrds' "Mr. Tambourine Man" when it went to #1 and thought, if I dubbed on guitars and bass onto that, we could have a big hit with this Sound of Silence record. And of course, it goes to #1. So that led to, so you've got these bands like the Byrds and Simon and Garfunkel putting these jangly sounds on. Ultimately, that impacts on other bands, like Crosby, Stills and Nash, so you get this whole development, and that all comes from George playing the 12 string in A Hard Day's Night. And they were, the Byrds were originally focused in New York, but they heard that 12 string and it changed their sound. And then everything becomes connected in a way. Everything becomes connected.
And I use the 12 string Rickenbacker, the red one, the little red 12 string Rickenbacker. It's actually Trevor Horn's. And to do a few songs in our little covers band that we have, to do like the jangly type of things. That instrument is a fantastic instrument, and it's interesting how certain instruments make you write and play in certain ways which are conducive to certain kinds of songs. I suspect that non-musicians wouldn't realise that, but there's a reason for all these different guitars, because they make certain noises, and the way you have to play them make you play in a certain way that somehow it's logical when you know that, why those songs sound like that and sort of written like that.
Yeah, and you can't have too many guitars, they all do different things. That's what I tell my wife anyway. What is it you use? What's the Rickenbacker you use?
It's a 1962 or 3 or something old, the very skinny neck, easy to play 12 string guitar.
Yeah, George Harrison had 001, the first one.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, his family still have it to this day, I think,
And Trevor wants, when we do songs, Trevor, being the producer, of course, he says, I think you should play this instrument. I think you should try it on that instrument, knowing full well that's what he wants. I think you should try. Whims of Steel. But when he says, try it on the 12 string, and it makes all the difference in the world, and I think the first time he had to do that was when he likes to sing the David Bowie songs. I can't remember the title, but they just sound right, and I suspect that's how they were recorded in the first place. Some of these tracks with a 12-string Rickenbacker.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that really fascinates me. Without that 12-string Rickenbacker,
was it John that played didn't he strum a Rickenbacker?
Yeah, John played the 6-string Rickenbacker.
Oh,
six-string Rickenbacker. But I think they, it's true that all those bands, all those jangly bands, they really do owe something to George for playing his Rickenbacker back then.
And the Byrds.
The Byrds, yeah, of course. That's the classic thing, isn't it?
Well, those the Dylan songs, weren't they?
Yeah, the Dylan songs, a lot of the Byrds songs. But the Byrds sound, the jangly sound, becomes like a subgenre in itself, over the years. If you think about all those bands from the 90s, like Teenage Fan Club and other things like Big Star, and this all kind of flows from the Ed Sullivan performance, really.
Well, the performance that first caught my attention of the Beatles was People and Places. Bill Grundy introduced them, and I was up in Manchester, living in Manchester, and on they came, and it was the first song, was it Love Me Do? And that was it. I was hooked right there from the very first moment I saw those guys on the telly. The whole appearance, their noise, the songs, the performance of the song, everything about it was so fresh and different, and it all became iconic. Not just one aspect of it, every aspect became iconic.
And of course, that is the magic of the Beatles. But of course, the other thing is they were just from over the way from you in Liverpool. Yeah, and that must have been a time when Britain wasn't that region friendly. That must have had an impact. I mean, what was it like being 4 boys in Manchester, hearing that?
Well, I was young, but and I was getting into, like kids do, try and get into clubs when you're underage, and we were able to do that. And there were 2 or 3 clubs in Manchester the Can. Oh, that was the coffee bar. The Oasis and the Three Coins. Those were the two rock and roll, rhythm and blues type clubs. And I saw the Stones there before they had a hit, and all these Liverpool bands, the Mojos and oh, excuse my memory. There was the Mojos, there was the Swinging Blue Jeans, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, whose drummer was a local Jewish boy from up the street, so I could relate to him. He was the drummer. His name was Brookbinder, I think. Elkie Brookbinder's brother was the drummer in Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas. So we had a northern scene of our own, which was wonderful, the music. It was really thick, solid, funky, loud rhythm and blues. And it was a very, very good scene, as I recall. I loved it. And funnily enough, one of the best bands you could ever see was Screaming Lord Sutch. And at the time, he had Jimmy Page playing guitar. And then when Jimmy left, I think it was Justin Hayward was playing. They're sensational guitar players, and amazing sound. Did you ever hear of a band called the Big Three?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Wasn't that Johnny Gustafson on bass?
That's right, yeah.
It was the first time we ever saw a band where the drummer sat in the front with a microphone stuck between his legs, looking very intimidating. He was dead rough looking and sort of scary. And he did the singing, and they had a guitar player who had a homemade guitar, and this guy, Johnny Gustafson, played bass. But the guitar player had filled the stage, first time it was ever heard or seen, with speakers. And so before Zeppelin and that whole idea of your stacks, and he had the whole stage full of speakers on his homemade plank of wood. It blew our minds. And this drummer out front, so he was very loud. And it was the most extraordinary noise. And that was around the time of pre-Beatles, rhythm and blues coming from the north of England and the bands in the north. I also remember seeing, who was Long John Baldry. So that kind of American blues music was being done really well by the English bands. But what the Beatles did was they brought non-rhythm and blues music to us. It was just harmony, great songs, love songs, basic, witty love songs in a way. And that's what was very refreshing, I think.
But the North, look, a scene is a scene, and if no one's listening outside the scene, then it doesn't amount to much. I think the Beatles obviously kind of bring it to a wider attention.
Well, yeah, we'd never been to London yet. We were kids growing up in my generation. I was really lucky because I was 2 or 3 years younger than those guys. So I got the benefit of, I was the next wave of young kid that got to respond to their pioneer work, and their body of work allowed me a platform from which to start and express myself and my bunch of contemporaries. So we were really lucky to be just behind the Beatles in terms of age, so we could benefit from their work, really.
One of the big debates is, were the Beatles a boy band to start with? And I think there's a good argument to say they were. Those songs like She Loves You, as hooky as they were, and the energy that brings you into this kind of new magic world. But you're an art school student, right? And by 65, 66, 67, you got Rubber Soul, Revolver, Pepper. That must have been very appealing to someone in your position, because you were an art school student, right?
Yes, and I was at art school there, and I was at art school doing session work in London to sort of get a few extra quid. I don't quite remember what. Yes, I suspect, was that when Sergeant Pepper and all that?
Yeah,
so it was getting a lot.
Yep. Pepper is 67, but Rubber Soul is 65, and Revolver is 66.
I was one of those people that, and I always have been, I'm not terribly quick. When their new songs had come out, I'd always go, I'm not sure about that. I don't think I like that one. And then, it'd become a huge hit. And then gradually it gets me, I think, oh my God, that was brilliant, isn't it? It's utterly brilliant. But there are people, as soon as they heard it, goes, that's fantastic, that's amazing. And I've had that problem all my life. I remember when Bowie and stuff kind of, I don't like that. And then, a year down the road, thinking, God, that was amazing, that track when it came out. I didn't get it. And it was like that with some of the early Beatles stuff. Some of the songs I didn't get as quickly as I would others.
Yeah, but they're changing everything, aren't they? Fashion and cultural attitudes and stuff like that. Must have been very interesting to be around. Did it have an impact on you? I mean, it must have been an absolutely fantastic time to be an art student.
It was a fabulous time to be an art student. Well, I remember, before the Beatles, Carnaby Street arrived around that time. And I was at Birmingham College of Art, and I remember getting on the train and taking my stripy trousers with me, because if I would have been seen walking around Birmingham in my stripy trousers and the other shit I wore, I'd have been probably beaten to within an inch of my life by some guys. But we used to get on the train, and then just before we pulled into London, I'd get my stripy pants, and all my gear, and to get off the train in London looking like a 60s kid. That was all because of the Beatles, the way we dressed, everything. The whole culture was changed, wasn't it, by them. And London was the place to go when you could, if you could get off it, because it was so much fun to just look around. That's where the miniskirts were, and all the people were daring to dress like that. In Manchester and Birmingham, they weren't, not to anything like the same degree, not for years and years afterwards.
Well, because everyone talks about it as a revolution, but I guess to a large degree, countrywide, it was an evolution rather than.
Yes, yeah.
And drip fed.
Bieber.
Oh, yeah.
Bieber arrived, and we used to do the Kensington Antique Market and buy our boots, and that was marvellous for me to be able to buy some boots, because I'm only 3'6", and I was able to buy my little lifts, in the Kensington boot market.
Yeah.
It was a big help to people like me, to the Beatles. I owe my height to the Beatles now.
Let's call it stature. We have to bring the threads of your career together. Of course, you start working with Kevin Godley. So I heard that you went to Apple in London after the Beatles did their famous adverts looking for new talent. So you just started working together, and you decided to go to London. Is that true?
I don't remember how we heard about it. We heard that Apple were going to sponsor young talent, and I think we were still at art college. And I remember going down, and I think me and Kev went down together to the Apple offices in Savile Row, and we went up those stairs, and we sat in a waiting room and a kind of reception area with a bunch of other hopefuls. We were clutching, we'd written a musical, and we'd not only written the musical, we'd illustrated it as well. I think it was full of, like almost not quite storyboards, but we'd illustrated the musical as well. And we went in eventually to see who started out as their roadie, Tony Bramwell, who helped become a major executive with the whole Beatles operation. It was Tony we saw. We later got to know him when we were in the music business, but we were dismissed summarily at that point. It didn't register. But the interesting thing I'll always remember about going to the Beatles in Savile Row to Apple was that as we were going in, Igor Stravinsky was coming out, and someone said, "That's Igor Stravinsky," and it was. I mean, it was Igor. It was getting on, but he looked fantastic. And to think that Igor Stravinsky, the Rites of Spring, was trying to get a gig out of Apple was a bit mind-boggling. What could he be doing there?
I just adds one more person to the list of people Apple turned down. You and Kev, David Bowie, Stravinsky.
Yeah, Igor, who? Tony Bramwell probably hadn't, in those days, probably didn't know who Igor Stravinsky was. I'm sorry, Tony, of course you knew exactly who he was.
I wouldn't bet on it. Maybe he did. Maybe.
He looked wonderful. He had this fabulous suit and I always remember his carved walking stick, this Stravinsky, and because an old gentleman, and he looked quite wonderful, and so that was a thrill. That was a thrill just to have been there and seen that.
Yeah, I bet. But also, Apple itself is a first, because it's the first time a major artist sets up a label in that way, that actively sets out not just to represent the artist, but to encourage and nurture new talent. It must have been very interesting to be there at that time.
I remember the excitement. I remember the excitement hearing that the Beatles were starting a label. You've reminded me of the feeling that I had when it was possible that people like us could go down there and maybe, get sponsored a bit to do a bit with the Beatles label. It was all very, very exciting.
Eric Stewart has said to me several times, without the Beatles, he wouldn't have become a songwriter. He wouldn't have set up Strawberry Studios, named after strawberry fields forever. And actually, Strawberry Studios plays an absolutely integral role, not just in other people's careers, but 10cc's career.
Yes.
Is it possible to imagine 10cc without Strawberry Studios, for example?
There certainly wouldn't have been a 10cc without Strawberry Studios, because that's how it arrived. We were messing about in studios, and some guy came and said, "That's a hit record," because it was in the studio and the right environment, sounded fabulous, and it was released, and it was a hit. So because of the studio, and ultimately Paul came there, and and worked there, and we got to meet and got to know Paul, and he was inspirational, and he hopefully he still is to a lot of people, and look at that body of work and that absolute immense talents, that these guys had, particularly the writers. I was thinking about the Beatles thing. That was the other thing that I can relate to the Beatles, in the sense that I don't know many other bands or people at all that could relate to the relationship that Paul and John must have had. Like I think of it because I had I'm sure it's a similar sort of writing rapport, which is a completely natural writing rapport with Kev, 20 odd years. And from day one, where we'd start writing together, we had this sort of very easy, natural way of bouncing off each other, which we brought to the party, and we continued to have, because it was a natural thing. And John and Paul had that natural writing relationship. And it's a very special bond, and what a wonderful thing. And I'm sure we wouldn't have even tried to do that had it not been for the fact that we knew that John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote songs together. It's funny sitting down with someone you haven't written with before, and, how do you start? What do you do? And it can be quite funny. I remember it was quite easy for me and Eric. We enjoyed writing together quite a lot.
Well, there's not that much, is there? Life is a Minestrone on the original soundtrack. I can't think.
Yeah, Silly Love, wasn't that?
Oh, yeah, Silly Love.
Yeah.
Sorry, Silly Love on sheet music. There's a lot of joy in those tracks.
Yeah, because we enjoyed ourselves. But we used to have some wonderful rows. I won't go into the detail about do you realise what he suggested we do? We went to a restaurant once, and Graham was very upset. There was something on his mind, and he'd been writing with Kev that day, and he actually, in the end, he had to say, "This is not going well at all," because why? What's the matter? What's the problem? And he says, "Well, Kevin wants to start with this phrase, and I just don't think it's right for 10cc."
Yeah.
Eric hasn't told you this story, has he?
No.
He says, so we said, "Why? What's Kevin was out there?" I go, "Yeah, I think it'll be good. It'll be good." He says, "He's got these lines I can't use. I can't put them in this song. Why? What could be so terrible?" He said, "Well, tell him what your lines are." So we did it. He goes, "Well, I think it should start with, I want you to get down on all fours and shit in my handbag." And I looked at Eric, and
Oh my God.
we looked at Kevin. I think I said, "Yes, so what's wrong with that?" I'm totally into Kevin's words. But even Eric was horrified at that. I can't have that.
No.
Can't have that. We didn't have that. It didn't stay.
No.
But Kev's a wonderful provocateur, he'll just do it to wind you up, and he was obviously winding Graham up.
Oh my God. No. he's one of those people who's always doing his voices and stuff. It's I think it must be peculiar to that group of people who grew up in the 60s and 70s listening to things like I'm Sorry, I Haven't a Clue.
Yeah,
You know, it's a
yeah.
Tim Brooke Taylor goodies vibe.
Yeah.
You know,
It's funny how that spills over into, like, Monty Python as well. That kind of adopting personas.
People don't do it anymore.
No.
So when was the last time you were sitting in a pub and someone went, "Ooh, darling,"
Exactly, yeah.
they'd probably get accused of being
my dad.
transphobic or something, you know. But actually, it was quite funny that people just adopted these voices all the time, you know. Lowell's great. Actually, he's a really interesting character. I've worked with him a few times, and he's incredibly enthusiastic, very funny. He says he's got no memory in that, but he's actually got quite a good memory.
Yeah, I think a few prompts and the stories come back, don't they?
I love that stuff about coming down to. Can you imagine, like, not being too frightened to come to London from Birmingham with stripy psychedelic trousers?
Yeah.
That's a bit like now with the girls coming over from India and Saudi and in hijabs and niqabs and stuff, and then getting changed on the plane to go for a party in London. Same thing, right?
Yeah.
Plus ça change.
Yeah.
Different cultural wars, but same thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Something that's come up quite a lot is and even Lemmy was talking about it in the previous podcast about that idea of not coming from London and the regionality and bringing that to London and making people, everything was so, the BBC, everyone was so sort of London centric, and sort of making people realise there's a whole lot more to this country and introducing that to the wider world. It's not just about, that BBC English. It's like there's that sort of very particular humour which you get from different regions, and selling that to the world. And I think even making us as a nation understand that and embrace that.
It's a huge impact. One of the interviews later on, it's not going to be a surprise to say it, but I interviewed Dick Clement and Ian Lanfranel, and they're telling a very interesting story because basically The Likely Lads was the biggest sitcom of the 60s and huge. I mean, with Steptoe, they were the two big ones. It got turned down 4 times. 62, 63, they just kept turning it down. They were just trying to get, it's their first sitcom, trying to get it turned down. Then Hard Day's Night hit, and their agent got a call. Have you got anything Northern?
Yeah. Those funny chaps.
And so, everything that flowed from that, from Porridge to, everything that they did afterwards, and a huge beat on Nuts, the pair of them. We'll go into that then. But yes, the regionality, the importance of the regions. I was at the BBC 25 years ago, and I started making films for them that were promo films internally, where they finally started talking about the nations and regions, right? Even 25 years ago. So it was the idea, it's like, are we a bit London centric? We have to kind of make sure that we've covered Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England, and the regions as a separate entity. So that it became an actual thing, right?
Yeah.
But definitely, if you went back to 1962, that wasn't a thing.
Yeah. I've noticed that now, and like the BBC, when they do the travel reports, they start on the roads around Manchester because they're based in Manchester. And it makes you realise how often, like, the weather, the traffic, it's all based on London's really important. And some other things happen in the rest of the country. And it's just changing that focus makes such a huge difference, I think.
But so we are a city-state. London is 25% of the economy and everything is. And as a result, that London-centric thing is totally understandable. One of the things I always think is really, just to upset everyone, but I spend a lot of time traveling around the country, and people always say things like bloody Londoners, Southerners, and it's like, mate, come to London. It's all you Northerners. You live there.
Exactly.
I only know 2 Londoners, me and my wife. Everyone else is from somewhere else.
Yeah.
They're all from. It's like, if you want to make it, you don't stay in Cornwall. You come to London.
I had an argument with somebody in a pub once years ago. I was in Nottingham, I think, and he was saying he didn't like London and stuff. And I was like sort of standing up, because I'm not from London, I'm from the Southwest, and I was like standing up for London. He's like, oh, London, I've got no problem with London. It's the people who live in London I don't like.
Well, again, who are from all over the place. Actually, it's you can see how slick this link is going to be. But I was just thinking, my mind went straight to the Beatles and Liverpool, and then I was just thinking of our guests this week. One of the things we're going to be doing on the show is not just talking to all these, celebrities and everything. It's talking to someone with a more interesting story, but who's more like us. And this week's guest is a really interesting chap who I first met 10 years ago, and Mark went back to meet him recently. Dave Bedford.
Yeah, amazing. Well, probably one of the few, if not the only person who was prescribed the Beatles by his doctor, which is incredible.
He was prescribed the Beatles by his doctor. We'll come back and talk about it afterwards.
2014. I remember David coming to me a while ago, and when he described how he felt and when I examined him, it was clear that we could make a diagnosis of fibromyalgia.
Robert Moots, Professor of Rheumatology at University of Liverpool.
And David, like many people with this rotten condition, was having a really awful time and feeling really miserable with it.
David Bedford, Beatles historian and fibromyalgia sufferer.
When I eventually had to give up work, I was 35, and my doctor said, right, you got fibromyalgia. You're going to have to get your head around the fact you're probably never going to work again. It's now a battle of the mind. You've got to find something. And the Beatles then, in a way, took over my life as a therapy and has been for the last 10 years. It just became the next chapter of my life. So if you'd have taken the Beatles out of these last 10 years, I'd have been sitting in a corner somewhere twiddling my thumbs, feeling sorry for myself.
I think David's the first person I'm aware of who's been prescribed writing a book about the Beatles as treatment, but it doesn't surprise me that that's helped him. What he's done is helped focus on something away from his disease, do something that's interesting and practical and useful. And I think by doing that, that's actually been a big component in his recovery.
2024. So Dave, last time we saw you, I think your first book had just come out. So obviously quite a lot's happened in the meantime. Can you talk us through?
Yeah, quite a lot. For me, it's funny, my level of contentment was seeing my book Liverpool on the bookshelf in Waterstones. The book sold out in 18 months.
Wow.
Worldwide, and suddenly everybody was talking about Liverpool.
Yeah.
And life just hasn't stopped since then.
Yeah.
So I've now just finished writing and publishing my 8th book.
Wow.
I've got 2 more I'm working on at the moment, with another couple of them planned. I've been to the United States, I think, about 15 times. Around the UK, around Europe, getting invited to talk. I've been on podcasts, television. And then probably the biggest thrill in a way was making a documentary called Looking for Lennon. I mean, this is just insane in a way, the way all this has gone from 25 years ago. Having to give up work because I got fibromyalgia.
Yeah. You know, you've now become the authority figure when, originally it was just, it was a passion of yours, and it was, you were prescribed the Beatles to sort of, help you through as almost like therapy.
But when somebody buys my book,
Yeah.
it's like they're buying the first one.
Yeah.
It's a big, big thrill for me.
Yeah.
That people still want to know what I've written about. And as you say, it became my therapy. And the weirdest thing has gone from inviting the quarrymen to come to Dovedale School, where my kids were at school, of course, John and George.
Yeah.
That was 20 years ago. Get to know the guys in there. That in 2023, I was invited to play with the quarrymen.
Wow.
So now I'm playing with the guys who were there in John Lennon's first group, spending time with them as friends.
Yeah.
I've got to know them really well.
How did that conversation come about between you meeting the quarrymen and them inviting you to join the band? That's quite a big leap.
It is. Rob rang me up and said, "What's this about you playing the guitar? You never told me that." I said, "I just never came up." He said, "Well, I'm doing my skiffle tour. I'm going to play some songs. If you're doing your country tour, do you want to do some songs together? Do you want to come and join the quarrymen?" Well, that was a tricky one to answer, wasn't it? Yeah.
So with fibromyalgia, when we interviewed your mum, she said about how it affects your short-term memory. So it seems really interesting that the fact that you've been doing these books, as well as it being therapy, to have something to keep your mind occupied, actually there's a way of storing information, and it must have been really helpful for you, for your own memory as well. Is that?
Well, it is good. It's still an issue. I can forget conversations. If I don't write things down, my phone is just full of reminders.
And how generally your health? You seem much healthier than last time I spoke to you, and you're walking really well. So how's that been for you?
Pain-wise, it's still exactly the same as it was back then. Still rheumatic, so bad weather. It's terrible. But because I've had it for 25 years, I've learned to live with that.
Right. Yes.
So it's a hell of a mental battle you've got to go through to say, I'm going to walk, it's going to hurt, it's going to do me good.
Yeah.
But by doing that, I lost nearly 3 stone
Wow.
in weight.
Yeah.
And with diabetes, I had to do that. With blood pressure, I had to do that.
Yeah.
I've kept that off. And again, what I've always been really good at is masking. what's going on.
Must feel amazing though to go from that, like, I need to walk, it's going to hurt me, to be like, I need to stand on stage, play a bass guitar. I mean, that's quite a leap as well, isn't it?
It is, and
And the fact that you can do that now.
yes, I go through a lot of knee support.
Yeah.
And it's weird. I'm playing with Rod and Colin, who are both in their 80s, who are fitter than I am.
Yeah.
And I
At least you're doing it, you know.
well, that's it, and that's the whole thing. It's putting yourself through these challenges. I think I can do that.
Yeah.
I need recovery time, but that's fine. I'm used to planning all that now.
Can you imagine what life would be for you without the Beatles?
That would just be crazy, wouldn't it? And in a way, it's almost sort of, there's me signed off work. What do we do? If they went there, what would I've got obsessed about? I don't know. And there's still something new to learn about it all the time. And I suppose, in a way, without being too cheesy, I've got by with a little help from my friends. So,
So this is a very specific thing, isn't it, that Dave's gone through, you know, having FM and then, like, you know, becoming a Beatle expert because he's been prescribed it. And often when people talk about the influence of the Beatles, they talk about things like they changed haircuts or they changed the way the symbols are recorded. But it's often been much more profound. We keep finding that, don't we?
Yeah. And amazing man as well. He's so sort of, the fact he's, he's almost constantly in pain, and he's so sort of calm, and, I kind of felt really great to meet him, just hang around with him, because he just kind of oozes this sort of sense of peace, and sort of, he's kind of found a way of being happy with his lot and stuff, and found this new kind of enthusiasm and a way to, have an outlet for that, I suppose.
I think it was when I first met him 10 years ago, he was in a bad way. He was on a stick all the time and everything. So it was great to see him back, coming towards me without a stick, today when we were filming. But he was from a position of nowhere. So he had just finished his first book, Lily Paul, when I met him. But now he's playing with the Quarrymen who are left. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, what a turnaround.
So we are going into straight away into Lol Part 2. I love this bit. You'll really enjoy this. Lol talking about working with Paul and George, and also his MTV years. Enjoy. It's interesting that the spirit of creativity, the differences between you and Kev and Eric and Graham, actually breaks up 10cc, but then it finds other forms in your career. So obviously you made tons of videos and things. I wonder if, when you look back at the Beatles visuals now from the films, Yellow Submarine, of course, because you were into animation, whatever, and all those promos like Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, I wonder whether, apart from creating the industry in the first place, I wonder if you feel like they had much of an impact on you. What was the bridge?
Well, funny enough, we did that first. Was first mentioned to me by Paul, because it was one of the great thrills of my life was in a hotel in Los Angeles where I can't remember why, me and Kev were there. And we're staying at this hotel, and all the hotels have pools because it's nice weather there. And we're sat by the pool. I can't remember why, but someone says, "There's a phone call for you, Mr. Creme, Mr. Creme." Oh yeah, who is it? Who can it be? They said, "It's Paul McCartney." So I obviously got up, I went and took the call. And what Paul was after was he was doing this video for Ringo. Ringo was doing a solo album, and it was called The Cooler, the track we did was called The Cooler. Paul wanted us to do 2 or 3 songs, videos, as kind of a long form, which he was going to play at the Cannes Film Festival, and he was subsidising this record, this album, and writing some of the songs for Ringo's album. And we used to go around to Paul's to discuss, the ideas and the storyboards. And he would keep telling us that I did that, and with the, and he kept telling us, and it was like everything we thought, he'd sort of done it all before, but he had, him, the boys, they'd done all those things with the Magical Mystery Tour, all these daft ideas with the promo clips before there were such things as what we now call videos. They certainly had. They were they were prime movers. Let's face it, those guys, and huge influence on I suppose, my whole life, every aspect of it has been, been influenced by them.
George, in one of those little modest moments he had, obviously said that the Beatles invented MTV because, you know, they were the first people sending videos out on tour instead of being there in person and stuff like that. But it does bear some kind of scrutiny, doesn't it? Because apart from pushing pop to the forefront of pop culture anyway, they were the first people sending out promos and stuff. My old boss, Keith McMillan, who run Video Visuals, he was the first guy, you know, who was based in LA making promos long before the Americans started doing it. It was a British thing, and the Beatles were at the forefront of that.
I remember, and we were certainly making promos a couple of years before there was an MTV. There wasn't, unfortunately, an MTV when we started. I wish there had been, but there wasn't. The first 2 years, I think it was only England where really there was anyone playing stuff on telly. And Germany, Musikladen would play a few clips. They'd play them if the reason that the videos got played, as I remember it, was if the band wasn't available because the record company wouldn't pay for the group to visit Top of the Pops studios or whatever. They'd send a little promo clip that was made on the cheap to promote the artists that weren't physically available. But Kev and I saw it as a way to, because we did it for ourselves. We had a track that we'd written, and I think it was probably Kevin that says, you know, we should try and do our own video. Do you think possible? And we went to the record company, and they said, well, how much is it going to cost?
Yeah.
And if you can do it for next to nothing, but also you'll have to have a professional director, someone that's done it before, with you. And we were going, well, we don't need anyone like that. And of course we needed someone like that. And we did have somebody like that. And they opened our eyes to the whole world of video. And after that first day in the studio, because we only got one day, obviously, and seeing all the toys, as I was saying before, in a control room for post, that's probably why we did nearly every video after that. The post-production idea, the special effects, if you like, the post-production idea was at least half the idea. Because once you'd seen that box of tricks and thinking how you can maybe use things like that or new things like that, it opened up a whole new world, a new canvas, loads of new possibilities, new colours. And we took to it like a ducks to water, and we were frustrated movie makers too, as well, you know. So it was a great way to feel as though you were involved in the filmmaking process by actually making these videos.
And how did your career as a video director develop between the point of the day that you wanted to become your own director, presumably for an Englishman in New York, and to the point where you're working for everyone? In summary, how would you describe that period in terms of what you achieved and how your own visual sense developed within that time frame? You did become the director of choice.
It was one of the most satisfying periods because we did, whereas with music, we inevitably felt like we were, you know, there's a super league and then there's a top league and then a lower league and all the rest of it. Obviously, the Beatles and the Stones and the Floyds of this world were the mega superstars in terms of sales and personality, and the nature of their work, their body of work, was the pioneer stuff that was the standard, you know, the gold standard of music and performance. I think I personally came closest to being at the top of my game and the game when I was doing videos, because we helped establish a form just by the nature of the timing. Again, you know, we were the first generation of video makers that got the videos on MTV screens and British screens. And they were all hits. Just about every track we did was a hit. And they were all pretty damn good videos. I was pleased with just about every single one of the ideas and the way they were pulled off. So I'm thrilled with that period of my whole life with Kev, because we did something that we really felt substantial in terms of its own milieu.
You know, the thing is, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to think about it, but MTV itself changed culture as much as the Beatles did. And you were right there, part of that.
It was influential, but it was a big disappointment to me. I used to, when we were in a position of, some people used to listen to us now and again. We did persuade, we had a marvellous relationship with MTV. We suggested on silly ideas that they might want to try and use, like, for example, when we did the Police's stuff, we even did it in 3 colours, the matching colours of the album cover. We printed Every Breath with a blue tint and a yellow tint and a red tint to suit the identity they'd given each of the guys on the album cover, Synchronicity. And MTV played those as just, for a change. And then from that one, we suggested to them, how do you fancy, instead of one video that's got like 20 cuts in it or 200 cuts in it, 17 separate videos with only one shot each for the Yes videos, where we said, we run a competition and see if people can figure out how many different videos there are actually of this band, because each one might look like one shot, but actually there's something slightly different, as well as it all being upside down. The whole of the Yes video was up them hanging upside down. And yes, the MTV management went along with it. Great, fabulous. So it was all young and full of energy, and it was a new energy in TV. But the disappointment for me was that I always thought it was a no-brainer for them to broaden the kind of music we did music to, because the thesis really is that, which is a thing I did at college. My thing with pictures and music started before me and Kev were doing videos at college, at art college in Birmingham. I did a little film, and I put abstract imagery on film, and I noticed that no matter how I edited it, and no matter what music I put behind it, when I played it out to people, it was in sync. Something, and so my thesis was, it was called an audio videosophy, that your brain will sync up noises to pictures without you even trying. It will just do it. You try it. You'll find something that, God, it syncs up. You've noticed that yourself. And I was disappointed because MTV wouldn't expand their repertoire to classics, to jazz. We could have done some great bits of imagery to the body of work that's in the classic domain or the jazz domain or the blues or country, whatever it is. But no, they wouldn't. In fact, they narrowed it, didn't they? It came closer and closer, and it just became rap. Now it's just quiz shows where they've put gloop on people's heads. I mean, there's no videos being shown at all.
No, they stopped that. Yeah.
But it was a big disappointment that the management didn't see the potential.
Well, that's TV for you. I worked at the BBC for many years as a producer. So, and I produce things like some bits of Glastonbury, but I also for TV and things like the Mercury Music Prize. Well, I had a boss there. He said to me, music and pictures don't really go together, And I said, well, you're joking, right? For the whole history of mankind, you had to be in the room with the musician and watch them play. You had to. Anyone who ever heard Beethoven prior to 1900 could only hear it by watching someone play on the piano or watch an orchestra playing. Absolutely crazy to say that. And I think that shows this fundamental disconnect between people who work in the visual arts and music, that they don't get, they go together. Lots of people do, of course, and obviously you two did.
Yeah. I mean, that to me is different to our philosophy was always that you should still leave room for the punter's imagination. I didn't want to spell out what a song meant. Like, I don't really enjoy the kind of videos that tell the story of the song. I'd much rather give an impression or set up an atmosphere whereby you still are allowed to interpret the song and its meaning for yourself. But at the same time, either see a performance so that you can see the artist do his thing, or you can see some kind of visual representation that puts you in the right kind of mood that enhances the nature of the song. But shouldn't necessarily take away from you the delight you have in putting your own interpretation on what the song's about or the lyric.
Yeah, that's
by having it spelt out for you. Well,
the one that I remember very strongly waiting to see was Two Tribes by Frankie that you did with Kev. That said something about the times we were in at the time. It was quite a political time, you know, it was still Thatcher, right? And so it became more than just a music video, more than just the new Frankie song, though that was a cultural thing. What's your thoughts about that now?
My recollections was two things. The big memories were, it was the first time a record company had offered to let us alter the track and offered to help alter the track and extend the track to make a video mix. And Paul Morley came up with the offer of captions and little bits of lines to stick on that we inserted, right? So it was the first time the record company actively wanted to be involved in a positive way, constructive way, to help us make more video-ness, right? That was great. The other thing about that was the tragedy of the fact that the prosthetics that had to be made to make the actor, the stuntman that was going to play Ronald Reagan, and the other one that was going to play Chernyenko, they needed prosthetics to make them up. I think it was the night or 2 nights before the shoot, the young man who was making the prosthetics drove into a tree, was in a coma from which he died. And our producer had to go to his parents' house, he lived with his parents, and go into his bedroom and get the mask that he'd made of the actor so that he could build the prosthetics and actually take that out of the room. And I wasn't there, but I imagine how horrendous that must have been. And then she got the people that made the puppets for Spitting Image to finish the prosthetic makeup, which wasn't quite as good as it could have been because it was done the night before the shoot, because this poor guy's work had been, this guy killed himself. So it was a bit of a bittersweet thing, that whole operation there. But it was an extraordinary shoot. Great fun of a shoot. Those are the two things I remember about it the most. Also, we were worried about being banned from being allowed back into America because we heard that the Democrats were showing at their convention this video because it was taking the piss out of Reagan. And we were told we might have trouble getting into the country, which we didn't.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those interesting videos. I watched it many, many times, and I did love that remix. So it's interesting you said that, that was done especially for the video. But these were political times, and video was actually a part of the culture, whereas I do think it's become just marketing now.
No, that was a very good period in video. It was also, there was a big crossover in videos when, see, the first few years of making videos, there were no experts, certainly in the record companies. They didn't have a clue. They relied on us to make a video that would help the record get on telly. And there were no experts, including us. And the spirit of rock and roll was alive and well in the making of pop videos, because the spirit of rock and roll is blundering on, having the time of your life, trying to make everything fun and exciting and in a way that everybody gets it, right, and enjoys it. Suddenly, after a certain point in time, the record companies decided to hire video commissioners, people who would veto, because they were starting to spend more money, I suppose, and a lot of it was being wasted. But the so-called experts that could determine whether these concepts were worthwhile or not. And I remember Kev and I were not happy about these people and having to explain ourselves and having to put in writing so that the lawyers could attest that we had delivered what we said we would deliver. It's very hard to put into writing. How do you put wrapped around your finger in writing? That was one of the first ones we had to do. We came up with this idea where there'd be in slow motion, there was candles, and how do you put that in writing to give to a lawyer and video commissioner at A&M Records? It was a nightmare. And I also remember when we came up with the idea for Rocket for Herbie Hancock, the video commissioner at CBS America says, "So tell me, you really think you can make robots interesting for 3 minutes?" And we looked down the phone and thought, who is this person? people have been interested in robots for decades. It's 19th century. We can't conceive of robots being interesting for a 3-minute clip. But you had to treat them with respect.
Yeah. Look, I've met Kev a few times. I can't see him.
But there was a time. The point I'm making is there was a time before the video commissioner in the record companies where it was free for all for people like us, and we had a fabulous time. We continued having a fabulous time afterwards because really they never actually got in the way. But it was a pain having to explain and justify what you were going to do to people that weren't coming from, they didn't have any experience. But with the Police, it was a fusion, but the records were absolutely, the band was fantastic. I mean, the best band I've seen live, I think. We went on the road, obviously, and we filmed them live. That was the best band I'd ever seen live. 3 guys making a racket like that. It was so wonderfully controlled. And Sting came out with the best line of any performer in front of a video that I've ever witnessed. And he said, he came up to me once, or me and Kevin, the first video, and he said, keep the camera on the money. He was right, of course.
Of course, the issue with the Police is that they all thought they were the money.
Well, only Sting said it, keep the camera on the money, and he was loving it. He posed it. And of course, he was right. He was fabulous on camera.
Absolutely nothing about that story surprises me.
Do you think that MTV at that point was just at the point though where it had become so big and so popular and so successful? I remember being in America where you'd be eating. It was extraordinary. You were watching this MTV thing and you were waiting for the next cut. You were waiting for the next image that would come up. I remember consciously thinking, never let alone what the next video is going to be. What's the next cut going to be of this video we're watching? It was, we weren't used to it yet. We weren't used to this bombardment of all these angles and cuts and things like that. And within the first year or two of MTV, it changed our psychology.
Because you were living it as a filmmaker, but I was living it at the time as a young man, as a teenager, as a consumer. And I felt that MTV did change culture. And obviously they write histories and do documentaries about MTV's influence now. Do they come to you and confront you with that, or discuss it with you? Are you interested in taking part in that conversation, to discuss the cultural impact of MTV and the kind of work that you and Kevin were doing?
I've never spoken about it. I've never bothered getting into the conversation, to be honest with you. So it's not, no. The answer is no. I'm not big on the theory of discussing all that stuff. I've never sort of mingled with that lot that do. We did the work and that was it. It's only a bit of entertainment. It's not exactly brain surgery. It's not very important. It was just trying to make entertainment.
But then we go back to the point of Without the Beatles. Look, the Beatles were just about entertainment, right, at the start. But in a way, once you look at the whole picture, it wasn't just about entertainment. It was about more than that.
Yes, the thing about the Beatles was it was absolutely unadulterated entertainment. You could take it on the most facile of levels and it would be very satisfying because there were good songs, well sung, beautifully played, and that way that made them pop hits, right? If you wanted to go deeper and be moved by certain things that you read into it, fine, but that wasn't on their minds.
That said, those later interviews, I think it's clear that sometimes it was on their mind. George is often doing stuff about philosophy or something. But certainly not at the beginning, but maybe more towards the end. I mean,
well, later, the older you get, yes, you become self-conscious. That's the trouble with. That's possibly why groups don't last that long, because it all conspires to make you get self-conscious. Success, people talk to you in depth about this, that, and the other, and then you start worrying: am I going to be covering that base and that, pressing that button on that one for that person? We did that before. Should we not maybe do this? It's all, you're losing that spontaneity and enthusiasm of youth, you know.
Well, the last question I ask people is, having you thought about this stuff, could you imagine a world without the Beatles? Would you want to? And why not?
No, because the wealth of the abundance of fabulousness that has been the result of the Beatles and everything that all that generation of people came up with, and their legacy has helped every one of us enjoy ourselves more, and has opened a lot of doors for a lot of people that wouldn't normally have been able to even consider going into the fields that we all went into, in media, in fashion, in writing, in everything really. The Beatles are symbols and icons of the best part of the 60s, and some of the more positive things that came out of it, certainly creatively. So I don't even want to consider the possibility of us not having the benefit, as well as the body of work that is just timeless.
Do you know, I love Lowell Creme. He's an amazing man. We've worked. The first time I met him, he said to me, "What are you doing next week?" And I said, "Nothing much." He goes, "I'm having a jam with Trevor Horn and Stuart Copeland. You know, they're my best mates. Why don't you come and join us?"
As he did.
And I was at the BBC at the time. I went, "Great, where is it?" He goes, "LA." And I went, "Well, I'm in..." Oh, that'd be nice, but I'm in London, you know. But if you get a chance, this would be a really good example of why you should subscribe to the Patreon, because we've been able to use 40 minutes or so today, but the interview is an hour and a half long, and it just wasn't, we couldn't cram it all in.
Yeah.
But there's a great story that, just to give you something to think about in there, where he's talking about how when he was working on When We Was Fad,
Yeah.
and he worked with George a bit, and then Paul would say to him, when he was working with Paul, he would say, you know, "Oh, how come everything George does and film does well, you know, and everything I do is the straight after Broad Street or something,
Yeah.
turns to shit." He goes, and he goes, "Me and Kev used to kind of use it against him." So if Paul would come up with, and he goes, if you don't watch the video, you won't see it, but he goes, when Paul come up with one of his ideas, we would go, "Oh, we'll run it by George." And he'd be like, "Stop using George against me." You know, like all good natured, you know, everything, because they were all really good friends. But yeah, that's worth watching Patreon for these extended stories. So it's not just a couple of extra lines, there's a whole 40 minutes extra, you know.
Yeah. So yeah, on that note, please subscribe. We're not going to do a begging letter, but it's, you know, the price, you know, it's the price of a coffee, of a cheap coffee in a pre media insaturated
Yeah.
coffee shop.
Yeah, well, not only that. I mean, just subscribe even just to the website so that you can get the updates. Because Mark and I are both writers, and you know, there's a perfectly good blog going on. 2 blogs, right?
Yeah,
2 blogs
got
going.
one but two.
2 blogs. one roughly about the Beatles, and the other one, if you haven't seen it yet, and one that is, because we're both journalists and we've both been in the media and we've both done reviews and we've both done that kind of thing. It's like we're still finding new music we want to enjoy and that Beatle fans should enjoy. So we're trying to pump that out to you as well.
Yeah.
That's free. Go and check that out. Not 1 but 2 blogs.
Yeah, 2 blogs, exactly. So yeah, one which is a bit more focused on directly related to podcasts and more Beatles related, obviously, and then the other one is kind of more of a kind of wider cultural kind of reviews and what we're into, and hopefully that we think the audience would enjoy as well.
So by all means, pay some money. But if you don't pay some money, that's fine too. Come and enjoy. Just remember to like it on all the places that you know you have to like it. What's the next episode?
Next up, we've got Mary Quant.
Another sadly missed legend. And again, she was in her 80s when we interviewed her. And what comes across in her case isn't so much tons and tons of detail, so much as that vibe of the transformation from black and white to colour.
Yeah, and someone who is like instrumental in not just talking about how the Beatles changed culture, but she directly changed culture as well.
Oh, she's as important as anyone.
Yeah.
You know, I've that was one of the great privileges of my life, meeting Mary Quant.
Amazing, yeah. And the change for women in the 60s and the sort of that kind of liberation, and people are always like, oh, the Beatles helped that happen, but yeah, you needed women to change, you know, you know.
Well, it's you know, all great projects are a team effort. You know. But you know, you can, there's a whole point, of course, of Without the Beatles is saying we're not saying that Beatles are responsible for everything, but we're saying that they often are responsible for specific things with specific people. So I hope you can join us to see how Terry Gilliam very specifically says the Beatles influence him, and Mary Quant too. See you on the next one.